Hey, you know, I love this because it gives me a chance to actually talk to you guys, find out what kind of things you guys are up to, and also get to challenge my own knowledge to see if I can answer everybody's questions offhand. You know, I think it was Einstein who said, you know, I don't need to know all the answers, I just need to know where to find them. And, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, you can't know everything, but, you know, I rely on a group of professionals to help me actually, you know, answer all your questions. And so with that said, oh, I got to turn off my mic here. And with that said, we've got Gary Simpson here tonight. Yes, he's my son. And he's a professional car restorer. He's worked for some of the top shops in the country. He's done upholstery, metal fabrication, complete car assembly. Is there anything you haven't done?
Nothing that I haven't tried.
There you go. And actually that's a, you know, a good way to look at it. You know, it's like, you know, so much of restoring a classic car, you know, people say, oh, you restore a classic car. Well, you know, restoring a car is not like one project. It's like a series of smaller projects. It can be, you know, paint or filling dents or straightening metal or, you know, straightening stainless, or, you know, there's just like, you know, each one has its own specific skill set, and just kind of learning, you know, different aspects of it. And there are always going to be those things that you're going to, you say, you know, I might not, you know, live long enough to learn to do this really well, but I can, you know, I can do this, this, and this well, and I'll pay somebody else to do this, you know, even for myself, you know, some of the engine work and you know, setting up valves on heads and stuff like that. You know, there are people that do that, you know, well, I know how it's done, but I know there's people that do that every day that can do it in a fraction of the time, and when they're done, you know, it's going to be better than what I could do. I know that all the valves will be lapped in there tight and everything else, so I know that it's done right. And I think that goes with almost anything on your classic car. I know, you know, there's things that, you know, even I, you know, would rather have Gary do, you know. It's sort of like when it comes to welding in a patch panel and having it flawless on both sides and you can't even find where the weld was. I trust Gary to do it more than myself. So it's a matter of, any car restoration is not just, you know, car restoration is not one task. It's a series of a lot of tasks together, and, you know, you're not going to be good at all of them, but usually it's a matter of either you know somebody or you're going to have to pay somebody to do those things that you don't want to take on yourself. To start out, we got a question. I see we got a question right away from Neil. Neil, thanks for joining us tonight. Hello, gentlemen. I have a 63 Nova SS with a stock front end. Do you have any upgrade suggestions? I'm on somewhat of a tight budget. Not sure if I should just leave it stock, or I've owned the car for 40 years. It's time for new bushings again. I did them 25 years ago. Well, that's a good idea. I'm not looking forward to doing upper bushings again. Yeah, and upper and lower A-arm bushings are, you know, they're a pain to get out. You know, it's like, you know, you almost need a press to do them right. I've done them on the garage floor before with a torch and everything else. It can be a challenge. Is there a shortcut or easier way to do them? If you want to keep your car all stock, Neil, I'd say, you know, there's, you know, yeah, the upper and lower control arm bushings are a pain in the butt to put in. And, you know, it's best done with a shop press. You're going to need like at least a 12-ton shop press to get them out effectively. I know some guys that'll do, you know, use a little heat, and then they can do them with like a 6-ton I-beam press. Is there an easy way to do it? You know, right away you started with, you suggest any upgrades? You know, my initial thought.
How far do you want to take it? You know, because there's plenty of Mustang 2 kits out there available for that vehicle.
even just upper and lower tubular arm kits are available for that car, you
That
know?
too?
And, you know, that might be a good alternative. You know, you go to like Speedway Motors, I think they have a good line of relatively inexpensive tubular upper and lower arms. They'll give you a little stiffer front suspension. I think that's a good choice, you know, because you're on a budget, you know, yeah, you can throw a ton of money into it. You can put a Chris Alston whole front clip on there and you know, really throw a lot of money at it. But unless you're going to really be doing some serious performance driving, you don't really need that. You could, you know, you could get away from putting in your own bushings by upgrading to tubular upper and lower control arms and really, you know, if you've got 25 years on the last set, you know, a set of tubular upper and lower control arms may last you the rest of the life of the car at this point, or, you know, it depends on, you know, how much more you want out of it.
This could be also another case where, you know, outsourcing, where you just take the control arms off, bring them the bushings and the control arms and say how much to press out the old ones and press in the new ones when you just bring them to a shop.
Yeah, and it's a case where, you know, like we talked early on, you know, it's, sometimes you're better off, you know, to the people that already have the H-beam press and they already have, you know, the knowledge on how to swap them out, and it's a case where you can just bring them the parts and say, I want new bushings in these, and yeah, you get rid of the headache completely then, and it's somebody else's problem. So, you know, I could go both ways there. You know, yeah, if you need new bushings, they make, you know, there's some nice polyurethane bushings and some good stuff out there nowadays that'll last, you know, throughout your lifetime and never need to replace it again. Or you might want to take, you know, a look at it and say, well, I'm going to have to buy new bushings and pay somebody to put them in. Maybe it's a good time to think about putting, you know, tubular upper and lowers. It depends what you want out of the car. If you're looking for just a pure 100% stock restoration, yeah, you're going to have to upgrade your bushings. If you're willing to make some upgrades and keep your old parts, you can always sell them with the car. You know, it might be a good idea.
Absolutely.
So that's my thought, Neil. Thanks for the question. John, he's got a question here. He purchased a 58 Impala convertible project in process. His convertible project in process. If you bought it, it's already being worked on. Goodbye, John, because, you know, a lot of time, you know, it's like I always say, you know, your car ain't, you know, from the time you tear your car apart to restore it, it ain't worth nothing until you get it back together, because nobody's willing to pay top dollar for something that's still in pieces or not done. So if you are going to restore a car, my little bit of advice is, if you are going to restore a car, go have a plan and the budget and the time and the space and everything planned out, so you have a plan for success. Too many projects just get like, you know, they get like a year into it and they either run out of money or they run out of time or they run out of space, or so many things that can come up in your life. And also it's important to have the support of your family members too, because most car restorations take time. So, you know, have a plan in place to succeed. The previous work on his 58 Impala convertible, great car by the way, included grinding off the old paint down to bare metal. Some places they cut through the rust and steel, and there are many small pinholes in the metal. How would you recommend repairing them? Repair them, weld and grind? He says that as a question. Weld and grind up the pinholes and stuff? I imagine, okay, from what I'm gathering here, John, they've ground on some of the rust, and now there's a bunch of pinholes in the steel and stuff like that.
A lot of that comes from moisture and debris dropping in between panels. So like you're talking probably the bottoms of the rocker panels, the bottoms of the quarter panels, bottoms of the fenders. And, you know, my best advice is take a wire wheel to it. If it really opens up and gets all really lazy, you're going to have to get in there and replace that, because the metal didn't rot from the outside in, it rotted from the inside out. And so, yeah, you're going to need to get a hold of some patch panels if they are available, or you're gonna have to make them.
Yeah, and a 58 Chevy going to be, there's some parts available for that, as much as the 57 Chevys, you can buy a whole body. 58s aren't quite embraced as well as the 57s. And that's kind of common, I guess. It's like one year will be real popular and then the next year not so much. So, and it happens across all the years and makes of cars there is. But there's probably not a lot that's going to be available. There will be some parts available. One of the things we do, I know, is we'll take like an ice pick or a scratch awl or something and really probe the metal and look for weak spots. And if we do start getting like a lot of weak spots in an area, then we'll plan to cut out and replace, either patch it, or if there's like a bigger patch panel or even a full panel available, then we'll look at that. As far as if it's just restricted to a very small area where you just have a few pinholes, you could try glassing them up for now.
You could try welding them up.
You could try welding them up. You can try leading them up for that matter. And leading is just a process of like soldering, where you're using a flux and a tallow and and a propane torch. And that the good thing about lead is it's not going to be susceptible to water problems that you would have with some of your body fillers. There's not an easy solution other than to get in and do it, essentially. Phil Duvall writes, another 63 Chevy Nova owner. Apparently it is a good night for Nova guys to be online. Thanks, appreciate you coming out. There is some kind of strip of foam rubber between the outer wheel well and the quarter panel.
It's noise deadening insulation that is squirted in there before the quarter panel is put onto the vehicle. That stuff is extremely flammable, so if you're putting a quarter on, my best best recommendation is to remove all of it.
Okay, he also writes, any idea what I should use to replace it, or anything? Is there anything to purchase, or is there anywhere to purchase it? I don't think it's actually like a weather seal itself as much as it's a sealant kind of thing.
It's a noise deadening. That's all it is. It's not there to seal moisture from getting in or out. That's what the initial seam sealer was on the very edge. If you find that stuff, and you typically find it in between hood and deck lid, between this outer skin and the inner structure. And all it is noise deadening material, or used as anti-flutter foam.
And really, a lot of the times when I restore a car, I don't put that stuff back in, just because it's only going to hold moisture and stuff in the future. It's only going to give you more headache down the road, and it's easier to get in there and paint and seal and everything without that stuff hindering the process. If you're dead set that it has to be in there, then I would imagine like a urethane.
Urethane seam sealer.
Seam sealer would probably do the job.
They also sell a 2-part adhesive gun, and Crest and 3M both make products that you can use. I wouldn't advise on sticking that stuff in there until you're done with all your welding. And you might not have access to get all the way around the wheel lip, but you'll be able to gain access to enough of it.
Very cool. Okay, we have a guest writing in. He has a 58 Chevy wagon. Okay, so the Nova owners and the 58 Chevy guys are here tonight. It's a GM kind of a day. I have a 58 Chevy wagon. Are there replacement floorboards available? That's a good question. I have looked for some parts for a 58 Chevy. parts for a 58 Chevy can be really hard, and you know, and mainly, you know, I was helping a buddy with a 58 Chevy Impala, and even like the rear window is different from the Impala to the Bel Air, and there's a number of issues like that, and I was surprised. I really anticipated the aftermarket to embrace the 58 Chevy more. It's 1 year only. You know, it doesn't share any parts with, or the body doesn't share any parts with the 57, and it doesn't share any parts with the 59. So it's a 1 year only car. And I think that's part of the reason why the aftermarket hasn't supported it as much. You know, I love 58 Chevys. It's one of my favorites. I think they're classically great looking cars. It can be tough to find parts. I'm not, you know, offhand, I'm not aware of there being floorboards available. But it may, you know, there's a lot of cars where floorboards simply aren't available. You know, I've, you know, having been involved with some other oddball cars, you know, I've seen guys even go to like Arizona and pull floorboards out of desert cars, entire floors out of desert cars, you know, and, you know, I think there's a number of them out in like Arizona and Utah and out in the West where, you know, there's cars in dry climates that have been, you know, are
in a rollover, but it doesn't mean that the floor pans aren't still good.
Yeah, and you know, you'd be surprised how many you find sitting on their sides where the floor or the whole floor is perfectly good because the car spent its whole life in a salvage yard lying outside, you know. And but so there's that option available. Look for a donor, or you know, if you can't find a manufacturer for a replacement, you know, sometimes you can do well, you know, like going to, you know, maybe modify a 57 Chevy floor, or, you know, find something close that that will work as well. We've done that before too, where, you know, you just go.
Well, and there's only a couple of problem areas. Don't race out there and, you know, cut the whole floor pan out. You know, if there's only a couple of patches you have to make, you know, by all means, you know, bend a little bit of metal and
Yeah.
beadwork in it, weld it in.
And actually, in a lot of cases, spend a little time on metal finishing the floorboard. It's a lot easier to do a few patches, and yeah, you sure have to spend some time metal finishing the edges and everything else, make it look good from underneath and on top. Well, on top gets covered up, but you know, you still want it to look good underneath. But if you spend a little time metal finishing those edges, you can get by with just replacing a few sections, you know, and maybe pulling some, you know, some good donor parts out of, you know, either an old car of the same year or something, you know. And with Chevrolet, you might want to also look at, you know, some of the other GM cars as well, you know, the Buick wagons or the Olds wagons as well. Because you'd be surprised how often they'll share the same floor pan, you know, where everything else on the car is different, but like, you know, some components that aren't as visible, you know, GM would save a few bucks here and there and reuse that tooling they use for the floor pan on more than just one make or model of car. Our Woody has a 1969 Dart Swinger 340, nice car. I need to replace the manual steering box. I've seen different ratio options. What do you recommend? And is there a particular brand? As far as just a straight replacement, most of the quick ratio boxes we put in are Borgeson's. You know, it's a company that we've worked with for a long time, and we trust them. But you know, there's others available out there. You know, is there another one that's better? You know, we haven't tried it yet, so we don't know. Is there a best ratio? The quicker the ratio, especially on a manual, the quicker the ratio, the more you're going to have, you know, the more arm pressure you're going to have to use to turn it. It's especially present on a manual box more than a power box. Power box, you got the assist helping you all the time. But with a manual box, keep in mind, who's going to be driving it and how you're going to be driving it. And you don't want a car, it'd be easy to say go with the quickest ratio you can buy, but that would make sense if your wife wants to drive it and she can't, she doesn't have the Armstrong steering to drive it comfortably. So yeah, use common sense, use a ratio that you're comfortable with. Like I said, we prefer to use Borgeson for most of our just the regular worm gear steering boxes. There's an endless supply of rack and pinion conversions out there that just seems to go on forever. Neil says thank you Neil, appreciate the kind words. Let's see. Checking in, the Paint God is checking in from Florida. Hi, Paint God. Thank you all for your suggestions. Thank you, guest, for checking in. Okay, well, if you got any more questions, feel free to enter them, guys. We've all got some that were submitted via email. We'll get to some of those right now. Okay, we have a gentleman sent in, says, hi, I have a MIG welder, and the plastic tube wire feed is plugged by corrosion. Where can I find a replacement tubing? Help me save my welder. We'll talk to the welding expert here.
What it sounds like is that the gun liner has now corroded and sealed up, and this happens over time, or as well as, if it's in a high moisture environment. But the gun liner is actually separate and removable from the actual torch assembly itself.
Yeah, inside the tube or the long hose that comes out of your welder actually contains one area that contains the gas and the other that contains your wire, and that wire is inside a liner.
The liner is assembled out of plastic, and then there's a huge coil of spring that can't kink, or it can if you're really abusing it, but the gun liner on a MIG welder is a consumable, and you just need to verify the manufacturer of the welder or the torch itself, and then just go ahead and look for gun liner and take a tape measure and measure out, make sure you're getting the correct length. There have been a couple of cases where I ran into it where a gun liner was no longer available for how old the actual welder was. Worst case scenario is you have to buy a complete torch assembly. We had to do that with the L-Tech here, but...
No, with the welder right behind you, yeah, we have an L-Tech welder, which was made by Lindy when they got into MIG welders for a while. Great welder, it's survived for years, still works great. But the torch that was on it, suddenly the liner stopped, we couldn't get parts for it anymore. And what we did in that case is we just took the whole torch head and unscrewed it from the machine and brought it into the local welding supply shop and said, hey guys, we've got a great welder, still works good, but the torch and wand, we can't get parts for this. And they quickly set us up with a new Tweco torch and
bolted right up, works great.
Yeah, brand new torch head, worked great, and it's lasted for years. So it's the kind of thing where, first check with the manufacturer. You can go online or, find out if you have a parts book with it. Sometimes guys acquire welders from all kinds of different sources.
And sometimes you could find a lot of parts information for specific welders, PDFs that you could find and download online. So you can cross-reference part numbers for that gun liner online.
And a lot of times, it's a lot like a lot of things out here. There isn't 80 different companies making MIG welders. they're sourcing some of the components from the same source. A lot of them are sourcing some of the same components from different places. So unless it's like, you know, a big name brand like Miller or Lincoln or, you know, one of the big welding companies, if it's not one of the big ones, if it's an off-brand, a lot of times you'll find that they're using somebody else's torch, or they're using, you know, parts off of other.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for you to get a new grinder and it says Tweco on it instead of Lincoln.
Yep. So keep that in mind, that there may be just because you don't, you know, may not be able to find one specifically for your welder, you may be able to get a welding, you know, torch and lead that will bolt right up to your machine and work perfectly. The next, sorry guys, I kind of forgot to move ahead. It's loading. All right. Okay. Can you recommend a source for cold wrap tape? And that's that, if you've ever, you know, if you got a car that was built in the 60s and 70s, what looks like black electrical tape that's around all your wiring harness stuff, but it has no adhesive on it, you know, and we've done some we've got some videos out there. I think we have some with Bob Wilson where he's rewrapped some harnesses and stuff before. You know, in the older cars, you don't want to like go in and put electrical tape all the way down the thing, because if you ever do have to service your harness,
you have one big gooey mess.
You got a big mess. By the time you get all the wire off, then you got like wires all covered with, you know, the adhesive and everything else, and it's impossible to just break into the middle of the harness and, you know, get a wire out, or, you know, tap a lead or something. So you want to replace it with the right stuff, and that's called cold wrap tape. It's also, you know, it goes by a few names. One of the sources we've had for it is National Parts Depot. They call it wire harness tape, and it's non-adhesive. They also have an adhesive and a non-adhesive. Usually the adhesive stuff is used for ends, unfraying, or if you want to tap in the middle of something, that's where you use the adhesive stuff. But for the main length of the harness, you'll just use the non-adhesive stuff. Moving forward, let's see, Leonard Smurek is doing an 88 Fiero formula. Any recommendations on areas of pitting on the exterior panel? Any paint recommendations on the plastic? Okay, Fiero is mainly plastic panel car. You know, and I imagine you're going to get, like, you know, from stone, from road rash and haze, and you know, so you're going to get some pitting and stuff on the plastic stuff. He's asking kind of like, you know, what should he do there, and any recommendations as far as painting the plastic parts?
You know, bring it, you know, sand down the material to, you know, a clean substrate with either 80 grit or 120 grit, and then they sell a product that comes out of a two-part adhesive gun that's called semi-rigid plastic repair, and you can use it basically as a plastic filler directly on top of the plastic, and it will remain rigid and bond, and it's not like smearing plastic body filler on plastic where it's going to potentially fail or, you know, fall out. The semi-rigid plastic repair is designed for doing repairs on stuff like that, as well as plastic bumpers, little trim pieces, all that kind of stuff.
And as far as painting it, you know, you can normally paint it with most automotive type paints and like urethane paints and stuff without much trouble with flexing. I know you can also add a flex additive.
Yep. add just a couple of drops of the Flex additive.
And
And that gives you a little bit of leeway in case you paint all the panels off the car and then bring them back over to the car to put them on, rather than having a mask off the car. Where it gives you a little bit of flex to get all the screws and the bolts in before you cinch it all down, and you don't have to worry about
So you don't have to
cracking.
worry about chipping your paint just because you flexed your bumper a little bit trying to get it back on. So, you know, you can basically use your standard automotive paints and prep, but you know, you add the flex additives to it. So you've got a little bit more resistance to cracking and breaking, especially on like bumper panels and stuff like that, where they tend to flex a little bit more. 63 Sunbeam. A guest has written in, I have an 87 Mustang GT. Oh, I was expecting a Sunbeam question. I have an 87 Mustang GT drivetrain 5.0 in a Sunbeam. I should have read the rest of it. Including narrowing and 4-link rear end. Wow. Coilovers all around. How do I initially square up all 4 wheels to roll straight? Any tricks? Oh, that could be a challenge. So he's put in a whole new rear suspension, and I suspect a front suspension, maybe.
That's what I'm guessing.
And yeah, because he's added coilovers all around. How do I initially square up all 4 wheels? I know you can, you know, there's like at-home alignment stuff, 4-wheel alignment stuff, but nothing's going to compare to, sometimes on a project like that, your best, in my mind, is your best to get it on an alignment rack and to seek out those guys that are, you know, hot rod, they're not the production shops, but the hot rod and performance car friendly shops that will do, you know, a 4-wheel alignment, you know, and you can there are kits available and things you can do in your own driveway and supposedly get it, you know, close. But that's what it's going to be. It's going to be close. You know, it's not going to be as precise as having your car on a 4-wheel alignment rack.
Or it's all digital readouts, all 4 tires in. They can say, all right, we need a quarter turn here, half turn here, and you know, dead center. But you know, you could get away with dropping plumb bobs and tape measures on the floor. The big thing there is, you know, before you start cutting out suspension components, is having established axle center line directly onto the chassis before you even start cutting or welding. And that's what starts getting you into the ballpark, but I have seen guys put in suspension setups and then adjust it after.
Well, you were doing race car prep for a while, where you were doing a lot of, you know, modifying front and rear suspensions and everything else, and it's a bit of a challenge to, you know, even dropping plumb bobs and trying to do it off the floor, and you know, getting your camber and caster and everything correct, and getting, you know, your rear axle perfectly square with your front suspension. You know, I can't say enough about, you know, put it on an alignment rack. You're going to find out more, you know, minute detail on an alignment rack than you'll ever do on your garage floor. You know, it may not be the exact answer you want, but I love your project. You know, it's like, I think the Sunbeams are great little cars. I'm not always a big fan of the Sunbeam motors. But you know, even those really scoot when they're tuned and built right. So, yeah, go ahead and you know, if you guys have any other questions, keep on asking. I've got another question here, came in via email. Fellow member writes, I have a 37 Chrysler Business Coupe. The body is currently off the car. Did they ever use bubble flares on the lines, or were they just double flares, like an inverted flare, I imagine? Also, I have plenty of 3/16 line, but the car has 1/4-inch line originally. From what I researched, is it possible to use 3/16 line? I'm going to use the stock drum setup in a single master cylinder. I'm thinking about using a one-way check valve by Willwood on the master cylinder. Any thoughts? Well, let's start at the beginning of your list. Bubble flares. I'm not aware of a 37 Chrysler Business Coupe having bubble flares, although what I have seen some of the early 30s Chrysler products use is what they call is just like a compression sleeve. And that's just a sleeve that's over the line, and then when you cinch it up, it compresses down onto the line to create the seal. Those will work. You know, there's a lot of weird stuff tried early on, and you know, hydraulic braking systems hadn't been around that long by 1937, less than 10 years actually. So I'm not aware, you know, for most of the Chrysler products of that year, I've seen either compression fittings or I've seen typical inverted flared fittings. So when you see like what you think is a bubble flare, it might actually be a compression fitting. Also, plenty of 3/16s, but originally the car was a 1/4. Yes, 37 Chrysler would have had 1/4-inch brake line. Will it work with 3/16s? Yes, but what will it do? Basically, you know, a master cylinder is just moving a certain volume of fluid out to the wheel cylinders. By using thinner line, the risk there is how quickly that brake fluid can get out to the wheel cylinders. You know, if your car was designed for using 1/4-inch line, brake line's not that expensive.
Yeah.
And yeah, you may have a stockpile of 3/16 line. We have stockpiles of line here too. You know, save your 3/16 line for that project where you need the 3/16, and you know, run down to your auto parts store and get a roll of 1/4-inch line and fittings.
The engineers that developed that system designed it to run with 1/4-inch. You don't want to be on the receiving end of running into all kinds of problems with your brakes just because you're pushing.
And finally, his last thing on there was he's thinking about using a one-way check valve from Willwood. Willwood does make one-way check valves, but it's not used on a typical braking system. They have residual pressure valves that you use like in a street rod braking system, but that's not what he's referring to, a one-way check valve. And typically a one-way check valve is used like on a racing setup where, you know, you're doing a lot of, you know, you design the system so there's actually a loop in the brake line system. So there's actually like a return line kind of setup. And the reason for that is so you're circulating the brake fluid. So because you're, you know, when you're performance driving, going around lots of, you know, you're using your brakes, you know, regular, if you're road coursing or something like that, you know, you're going to be on your brakes all the time. The rotors and the drums, they pick up heat. When they pick up heat, that's transferred into the brake fluid. The brake fluid can boil. In some racing setups, they plumb the system. So actually, you know, they use check valves in that to actually get the brake fluid to circulate a little bit. So it's just not always the same little bit of brake fluid in your caliper that's slowly building up more and more heat. So, but I'm not aware of, you know, any place where I'd used that on a 37 Chrysler. There are residual pressure valves that are used on drum brake setups. And that would give you like 10, for a drum brake, it's 12 PSI of residual pressure, and that's the amount of pressure that's left over in the line after you release your brake pedal. But the master cylinder itself should have a check valve that actually gives you your residual pressure. So it shouldn't be an issue if you're using a stock master cylinder and stock lines and stock wheel cylinders and drums. you shouldn't need a check valve for your brake systems, and you shouldn't need a residual pressure valve either. That's typically, you put in the residual pressure valves when you're adapting to drum and disc, and or have a master cylinder that, you know, if you're dropping in a Corvette dual master cylinder, there won't be any check valves in it because it's, or any residual pressure valves because it's designed for a disc setup. So there'll be zero in there, and most, you know, if you're gonna do a dual brake upgrade, a lot of times you'll end up with a Corvette dual or something like that. But it's something to be aware of, that, you know, if your master cylinder was originally set up for a drum brake setup, or if it's like, you know, if you took a master off one car that's a drum disc, you can't put it on a car that's disc because there are residual pressure valves in the master cylinder themselves. So be aware that that exists, and so you know, you don't leave 10 pounds of residual pressure to a disc brake setup that can actually cause it to burn out. Sorry guys, we're also struggling with I'm getting over a cold from 2 weeks ago. It's the Midwest, and it's the middle of winter here in Minnesota. And Gary here, he's just getting over a cold also. So yeah, we're working hard to, you know, make sure that that we're not coughing into the mics every 2 minutes. All right. I have a gentleman here who has a 1958 Ford Fairlane Skyliner, and he has his original 14-inch wheels. He wants to stay with his 14-inch wheels, but he wants to know what spindles will work to accommodate putting disc brakes on. He wants to put on disc brakes and rotors. He wants to keep his 14-inch wheels. You know, he was told that maybe spindles from a 70s Torino or a Granada or an LTD or a Monarch will work. Is this so? Maybe, but let's get to the heart of what we're doing here. You want to put disc brakes on your car and keep 14-inch wheels. Why change out the spindles? If the moment you change out your spindles, then you have like the height of your upper and lower control arms. You have the point where your tie rod connects to your steering. The tie rod connects to the spindle. All of these, you're guessing, are going to be real close to the stock. Why change out the spindles at all? Keep the stock spindles. There's a website, Scarebird, SCAREBIRD.com, I believe, that specifically makes kits for to convert older cars to disc brakes. And all of their kits use a set of brackets that they'll sell you, and then the rest of the components, go down to your auto parts store and get the rest. So if you need, for your car, I know they sell, that Scarebird has a kit that specifically works with the 58 Ford, full-size Ford, to bolt on 14-inch wheels and have front disc brakes. Without having to worry about bump steer and change the front geometry of your spindle and your control arms. And so you buy the kit from them, they give you all the brackets and then and the bearings and any spacers, and then they give you a shopping list, and you can go shop wherever you can get the best deal. And a Scarebird kit is, you know, under a couple $100, and you can build a whole front disc brake kit for, you know, $400 or $500 and have, you know, everything you're looking for without having to worry about sacrificing your suspension geometry. And it's, you know, I think a lot of people want to convert something else right away. That's not always the best solution, is to convert something else to work. Sometimes the best solution is to keep, you know, your stock geometry, especially on a car that new. A 58 is not, it's not like a 30s car where it's really, you're really challenged. The, let's see, the second guys, I'll bring up another one. My computer's working a little doggy today. And okay, a gentleman just watched our video. We have a video on the site, how to dye plastic parts, and I think we did the seat track plastic parts where we dyed them for our 57 DeSoto project. He wants to know, can I use this? Can I use a similar process and application for parts covered with that are made up out of naugahyde, for example, like the armrests or the padded sun visors?
Answer is yes.
Yep. That same color cast dye that's made by SEM?
Yep. There are two different product lines, and you know, they sell them in all the colors. But the bigger thing is making sure that you get the one that's for, you know, naugahyde and, you know, more flexible plastics, and then the other one is for ABS plastics. But, you know, the prep and the execution is pretty much the same. It's just a little bit variance in the actual product that you get in the can.
Yep. And yeah, it's a lot of the same work. You're gonna clean. You're gonna use an adhesion promoter. You're gonna then dye your plastic. And actually, if you remember Ross's '68 Chevelle that we've done some work on in here, that's a black car with a black interior. Well, originally that car was like metallic green with like a pea green interior. But he changed the color to black, and he didn't want to. Replace the headliner, didn't want to replace like a whole bunch of different seat belts. He didn't want to replace all the seat belts. And so he used the same process. He used the vinyl dyes and to, you know, go in and scrub and re-dye all of those parts. And that was like 15 years ago, and the car still, you look at it today and you look at the headliner and you'd never know it wasn't a black headliner, or it wasn't originally a black headliner. It looks as good as the original. And it's like, wow, you know, when he first told me that, I couldn't believe him. He also did his carpets that way too, as his car originally had all like, you know, green loop carpeting. He went in and he says, I just applied light coats and let it dry, and applied light coats and did it dry. And you can do that. You can, you know, you can even use it to, you know, touch up areas of your carpet and stuff like that, where, you know, you might get like a bad stain or something's got on the carpet, and rather than having to replace the whole carpet, you can just go in and you know, kind of fade in an area so it will get you by until you get around to replacing the carpet.
All that, and then sun bleaching on older plastic parts is incredibly common, and this also has a UV protectant in it. So you spray it down with it, it's not going to sun bleach again. So if you're talking about package trays or the little seatbelt plastic cover, you know, stuff works great for that.
Again, if guys have any questions, you know, that's that spot down below. Go ahead, ask away. Let's see. I have a question from a member who writes, this is a guy, and you may remember this from our last Q&A. He wrote in and he said he had a friend he was helping on his 49 F1 pickup, and he was trying to help him resolve some electrical problems, and he couldn't find the fuse block. And the reason why he couldn't find a fuse block is a 49 Ford pickup doesn't have a fuse block. Nor does a 57 DeSoto, or a lot of cars up until early 60s. Late 50s, early 60s is when the introduction of you know, that big plastic box under your dash with all the fuses in it. Cars earlier than that didn't have them. The reason is the main circuits of the car were all protected by a relay, little self-resetting relays, or circuit breakers. And circuit breakers, you know, if you had an overload on a circuit, they would pop and, you know, pop, and then they'd come and they'd reset themselves, then pop and reset and pop and reset. So, you know, those were real handy, and then a few components like the radio, or, you know, sometimes a heater fan, and a few other components had what they call inline fuses, and you've seen those too, where there's just a tube inline. So there wasn't a lot of fuses in a 49. Well, we did talk about this last time, but now our same gentleman wrote back, and I think I pulled this one because I thought it was, you know, something that a lot of guys run into, you know, because we're so accustomed to thinking everything's, you know, American car owners, I'll say that. Us American car owners are so accustomed to thinking all of our cars are negative ground and positive's the hot side. Where like a 49 Ford F100, F1 pickup is actually positive ground. And will it work the other way? Yeah, well, it will actually. And I have a 31 DeSoto that I ran negative ground on for years, and it would charge, everything worked fine. But the car is supposed to be positive ground. What I did have to do at one point was repolarize the generator, and that was merely, you know, a process of taking a wire from the field on the generator, and, you know, and don't quote me on this right now. I'd have to go back and refresh since I've actually repolarized the generator, but generators can be polarized either negative or positive ground, and they'll still function the same. So, yeah, I ran that car for years not knowing it was supposed to be positive ground. It always struck me weird that the battery cable didn't fit on right, but can you do it? Yeah, it'll work. But if you want it to be correct, if you know, and fewer problems, yes, the car is supposed to be a positive ground. A F1 pickup is supposed to be positive ground, and then your negative terminal becomes your hot side. Is there an advantage? You know, there was a lot of discussion back and forth. You know, a lot of European cars, or Volkswagens, I think, are positive ground. There's a lot of cars that go either way. From everything I've read, there's not a strong advantage, disadvantage either way, just as long as the car starts and charges and runs properly. Have you ran into that at all, Gary?
Not unless it was a DeLorean.
DeLorean? Wow. Were you doing 88 miles an hour? The next question I have here, member writes in, I'm replacing the inner fenders and core support on a 69 Mustang Coupe. Something you're probably familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
You've done plenty of 69, 70 Mustangs. What I need are the measurements of the engine bay to make sure everything is square prior to putting the fender and hood fitment. I need to find these numbers, or I can't find these numbers anywhere, so I'm hoping you guys can help me out. Engine bay measurements for a 69 Mustang. I can see where, you know, if you're replacing the inner fender wells, I know.
The inner fender wells are basically two flat pieces of sheet metal that come across and go on top, and then there's the strut towers, and then the core support is adhered to the front of that on those cars specifically. To give you measurements without having one right in front of me, no. I couldn't do it. But you know, if all of that stuff is still on the car, what I would do would be to cut out one inner fender, because there's 4 on that car. They go around the shock towers. Cut out the one, get that lining up and fitting the way you want it to. Grab some self-tapping screws or some Klinkos, hold it in place, work your way around all 4 of them, and then come in and cut the core support off, mock it up, make sure it measures out corner to corner the same. And that's how I'd go about doing it without the measurements offhand.
I know down at RJ Restoration where Bob Wilson, and you've worked with Bob a few times on some of that stuff. Some of the cars you get in where the front inner fenders and core support end up being welded up too high or down too low.
It causes a lot of problems with the rest of the panel fit and alignment on hoods and you know, front balances and the fenders to the hood to the fender extensions on those cars. So, you know, before you start cutting anything out, you know, just have a good base measurement directly from the top of the frame rail to the top of the core support, and do that on both sides, as well as, you know, the frame rail to the top edge of one of the 4 inner fender pieces. But if there has been any kind of frame damage, you know, that's one of those times where you need to address that now before you get into replacing inner fenders and core support. So, I mean, taking a quick look at it with the tape measure, seeing if you see any wrinkles or buckles in the rails in any place, and that's going all the way back to the torque boxes, if the frame rails are rusted out, I'd definitely advise on, first off, getting it to a body shop and just having them measure it out.
Yeah.
Tell you where you're at.
And sometimes even a frame shop can tell you exactly where the body's at on things too.
Yep.
Because they have the equipment to measure it precisely, and they have the, you know, the specifications for most cars. I know I've had a lot of cars where before I do anything on the car is I take it to the frame shop and say, you know, check this out, what's wrong with this? And, you know, because you can spend a lot of time getting a car all set up and then think you're set and ready to go. You spend some time getting everything to fit and everything perfect, then you realize something's off. And now you've adapted so much other stuff to make it work that in the end, you know, nothing works. And yeah, you know, I can see your dilemma. You need to make sure you're right on. For some reason, my live feed connection is suddenly decided to take a little bit of a break. It's slowly coming back up. I have another question here, quick, while we're letting that roll back up. Let's see. I've been watching the installation of rear quarters. Some of the videos. I suppose this would be one of Craig Hopkins' videos, where he's got a lot of good videos on quarter panel replacement. He says the host refers to using clamps to make the job easier. What are the clamps and where do you get them, please? So when replacing a quarter panel, what sort of clamps would you know, I know when you're doing any body work, usually we got a whole bunch of clamps that we'll use to hold anything in place. What do you use when you're, you know, like positioning a quarter panel and making sure that it's in the right place to clamp it all together before you actually start welding anything up?
You know, I use the horseshoe style vice grips to get around the trunk lid opening and that deep recess channel, as well as around the wheel opening, or sometimes use the duckbill, where it's 2 flat pieces of metal where you grip it onto over 3 inches. When it comes to holding the flanges around like taillight openings, you can usually get a larger set of seat clamp vice grips to come in and clip around there. When it comes to the door jamb, you kind of run out of options real quick. So you have to go ahead and use either self-tapping screws or Cleco pins.
Clecos are a good way to do it. You're gonna still you make 1/8" holes all over your car, but welding up an 1/8" hole takes
Not even a second with the MIG welder or the TIG welder.
Finally, actually looking at the clock, we're right at the top of the hour, and so we're gonna close this up. I want to say thanks, guys, for joining us here tonight. There are no dumb questions. Feel free to ask any questions. I think the biggest thing, guys, they assume they know something, and that's when they get themselves in trouble when they're restoring a car. And even today, yet I still ask a lot. Even though I've restored a few cars, I've done plenty. You can never have enough information. Everybody's always got a better way to do things, and you can find out so much by just asking questions. And if we didn't answer them here tonight, we'll be back again next month. Also, feel free to write in, and, we'll include your question. If we don't have time to answer it on air, we'll certainly, take the time to answer it, via email and get you the resources you need to help you succeed at restoring your car. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Gary, for being here tonight, and we'll see you next month.